These are more than buildings, monuments, and marble pillars. They symbolize the wealth and power of a nation that's risen to the top of the global order. But there's another side to the U.S. Capitol. Close to the White House, down the street from the Capitol building, are these encampments. These tents are people's homes, the only thing between them and the cold wind. And though the COVID-19 pandemic is in its second year, its full effect remains largely unknown. And things may still get worse on the streets of Washington and across the United States.
I never thought that'd be me. No, and I always thought, like, how do they do it? Like daily basis, like every day, like until it was actually me. My full name is Samuel Sly. I'm age 40, and right now we're in the District of Columbia, Thomas Circle, Northwest, and we all look up, it's cloudy weather.
Sly is a Washington, D.C. native. He says he used to work construction and that he's good with his hands. Before setting up his tent in Thomas Circle, his life was what many would call average.
Steady jobs, apartments, cars. I was going to restaurants, eating, and everything just went downhill. So they called us all in the office, and they said, due to Corona, we're gonna have to let a number of you guys go. So it was really like all of us. And it's like, due to Corona, everything shut down. There's no help, there's nowhere to go. No, and then the little bit of places that you could go is packed. So, I mean, what can I do? Eventually, I lost the place. I had to sell my car, and I went and bought me a tent.
Sly told us he's on a housing list, but he doesn't expect his turn to come up for another year. And he says he looks for work every day.
Every time my friend come around with the phone, I call some of the places I put in applications. I don't just sit around doing nothing. I do try.
Even folks who have experienced homelessness with some work history often get discriminated against. I mean, in DC, it's sometimes so bad that some employers know the addresses that signify a shelter. And so if that's what they're using because it's where they receive their mail, they're not even getting calls.
There's a lot of pieces to the employment process that are really exacerbated in a negative way by the fact that a person's homeless. So the lack of a fixed address is one. Many times homeless people are shifted around so much that they lose very valuable pieces of identification. So you lose your driver's license or your social security card or your birth certificate. It is an uphill battle to be able to get that stuff back. Remember, during the pandemic, a lot of the federal offices like Social Security and the license offices were closed.
I called my daughter recently, and she had told me housing been calling her. I said, I've been homeless for 30 years. I don't have a birth certificate yet due to Corona, because I just come home from jail. So I don't have a birth certificate yet. I'm trying to get my birth certificate so I can obtain some type of identification.
Marco Woodson is Sam Sly's neighbor at Thomas Circle. He calls himself the problem solver here. While Sly is relatively new to life on the street, Woodson says he's been without a home for much of his life.
Been in and out of jail most of my life. Basically everybody that died. You know what I'm saying? I don't have no mother, I don't have no father, I don't have no aunts and uncles. A lot of my siblings have passed away. That led to me being homeless. Man, I'm out here on the streets living this. I got to know how to function. You got to have that type of skill to survive out here for as long as I've been out here.
But the pandemic has made things harder on Woodson and his neighbors.
Toilet paper that went up, paper towels that went up, all this stuff that was cheap that went all the way up, sky high because of the pandemic. And it's hard for other people to do things for us because the prices that went up on them.
In 2020, homelessness was on the rise in the U.S., and close to 600,000 people were without a home. The pandemic disrupted counts of unsheltered people, leaving a hole in what we know about homelessness.
We've seen more encampments over the last year all across the country. Housing availability and housing costs, we've seen dramatic increases there. So that is driving the increase in street homelessness.
To afford a modest two-bedroom rental in the U.S., a worker must earn $24.90 per hour, and for a one-bedroom, $24.40 per hour. That's according to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. But as it stands, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. And in spite of rising inflation and the pandemic, some cities have started to tear down the encampments. Last fall, one man was injured when authorities in Washington, D.C. bulldozed a tent city.
People on scene in the Noma neighborhood today say that a city bulldozer hit a man who was still inside of his tent.
They're putting up concrete blocks in those spaces where people used to be able to have their camps. They're putting fencing around those places. So we know that homelessness is not going away, it's still going. So you're limiting the places that people can go.
I've had clients say to me, like, if you get evicted from the street, where do you go?
Hi, is anybody in there?
Washington officials say individuals can go to hotels or apartments as part of a pilot program to get people off the streets.
If they are not ready to go into an apartment because they don't have, maybe not the documentation or they have other issues, then we try to put them in a hotel until we can get those issues straightened out. For some people we can immediately place into an apartment. So that has been the effort over the last 2.5 months, and I think we've seen, at last count, about an 80-some% success rate.
We should always give credit when there's something positive. So they've pledged to put all of the people in encampments in housing. We talked to advocates in DC. They think that people being moved into housing is actually working. People are getting housing. The challenge is it's not long-term housing. It's going to be about 6 months. So this may be a revolving cycle.
We have people in, we have them engaging with case managers and with housing providers, but we don't have enough apartments and landlords that are willing to accept folks and to be able to move somebody out of the current situation they're in into that permanent housing.
Hello, outreach, anybody home?
Lissa Ramsapal is a longtime homeless advocate in Washington. She works directly with the community, going tent to tent.
Some places I feel like I know everybody. I walk through, not on outreach, just on my way from one meeting to another, and people are giving me their list of things like, when you come back through, can you get this? How long have you been out here?
Not long.
Not long. All right. You working with somebody to make it not long? Perfect.
For decades, city government first assessed the homeless for drug use, criminal history, and health issues before trying to help them find housing, temporary or otherwise. But about 10 years ago, Washington adopted a new method called Housing First. In other words, local government now prioritizes connecting people with housing first over other potential issues. The goal is to change the old model of housing people, and that includes trusting them more and fighting back against landlords who, according to Ramsapal, tend to discriminate against homeless tenants.
I was hoping to go to the river, maybe.
Leslie Caudill is a newcomer to Washington. He was evicted from his Kentucky home after years of legal and health troubles. He says he tries to keep his tent as organized as any home for himself and his 3 cats.
The landlady stole all my stuff and all my papers and 2 phones, all my clothes, and set me out on the sidewalk after they stole all my stuff. When I got evicted, I got a cab to the closest train station in Maysville, Kentucky, and I had to stay there 4 days in a station that's no heat, and almost nobody was there, and it sucked.
As much progress that the city has made, there are new fears. A moratorium on evictions that the city established during the pandemic has been gradually phased out. And advocates say evictions could trigger an increase in the numbers of people experiencing homelessness.
What worries me about the ending of the eviction moratorium is that there are people that even without having been able to be evicted, there has been nothing restricting landlords from accruing rental arrears. And so I do anticipate, along with my colleagues that I work closely with, we anticipate seeing increases in eviction by leaps and bounds.
And while the U.S. capital of Washington and other cities debate how best to get people out of tent cities, residents are still just struggling to survive.
What really keeps me going is I tell myself every day that I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it through here. I'm gonna make it through this. And I stick to it. Every day I get up, I say I'm gonna make it through this. I'm not gonna let this be the end of it.